Meri doesn't want to be back here.
Which
said
he relayed the conversation wrong, FYI.
Can I?
Friends, it's me, Meerab, welcoming you once again to Starspill USA. And today I bring you a story that is not merely about a reality television program, nor simply about the fame that came with cameras and lights, but about the breaking of a woman's heart in full public view, a heart that once held nothing but hope, faith and loyalty, but which was slowly dismantled piece by piece until little remained but silence and sorrow. This is the story of Meri Barber, later known to millions as Meri Brown, the first wife of Kody Brown, the original cornerstone of a family that would one day become infamous across the world. She was young when it began, filled with an unshakable conviction that love was not just an emotion to be fleetingly enjoyed, but a sacred purpose, a divine calling. She believed wholeheartedly that in Kody Brown, she had found not simply a husband, but the man who would stand beside her through eternity. And so, in 1990, Meri entered into marriage with Kody in what she believed to be a covenant not just of law, but of heaven and of spirit, a legal and spiritual union. Yes, but above all, an eternal one. To Meri, becoming Kody's wife was never about romance alone. It was about purpose, about legacy, about building a household that was rooted in faith, in the principle of plural marriage, and in the belief that sacrifice for something greater than oneself was not only necessary, but sacred. Those early days were full of dreams and fire. They were poor, yes, scraping by with very little, but rich in passion and in certainty. Kody's energy was magnetic. He spoke of building not merely a family, but a tribe, spiritual kingdom, a household that would stretch beyond themselves. Meri, in her youth and devotion, became the anchor of this vision. She was his first, his legal wife, the foundation upon which the entire Brown family was destined to be built. But what Meri could not have foreseen, what none of them could have foreseen, was that the very vision that united them at the start would, over the years, push her to the very edge of emotional ruin. She believed in plural marriage with her whole being, not because it was easy, but because she believed it to be divinely ordained. To share her husband was not natural, not without pain, but she saw it as part of her higher purpose. When Kody introduced Janelle, his second wife, Meri struggled as any woman would. But she accepted it because she believed love was larger than possession. In 1994, when Christine joined the family as the third wife, Meri once again found herself thrown into a storm of emotions, jealousy, guilt, loneliness. Yet through it all, she stayed. She smiled for the cameras in later years. She said the right things in interviews. But behind those rehearsed smiles, one question pounded relentlessly. Do I still matter to him? For nearly 25 years, Meri held one role no other woman in Kody's world could claim she was his legal wife. That mattered deeply to her and symbolically to the family. In a world where the line between equal and unequal blurred so often, this one distinction was her anchor. She was the wife, not just a wife. In the early days, Kody validated this, speaking openly of their connection, cherishing their shared history, honoring her as his first. But as the family grew, as more children came and responsibilities multiplied, Meri began to feel what no wife should ever have to feel: invisible. Then came 2010, and with it, TLC's Sister Wives. The world was introduced to the Browns. And what had once been a private life of faith and sacrifice became a national spectacle. The show promised to shed light on a misunderstood lifestyle, but it also shone a harsh, unrelenting light on Meri's pain. Cameras caught her discomfort, the way she withdrew as Kody grew closer to his newer wives, particularly Robyn, the fourth and final wife. While Kody's affection for Robyn blossomed publicly, Meri smiled politely in the background, her heartbreak captured in lingering shots and quiet confessionals. Fans noticed, they took to social media asking, "Why does Meri look so sad? Kody even love her anymore?" She deserves so much more. Yet Meri remained silent because despite everything, she clung to hope. But the final blow was yet to come. In 2014, after 24 years of legal marriage, Kody sat Meri down for a conversation that would alter her life forever. He told her he needed a divorce. Not because their love had disintegrated completely, not because of abuse or open conflict, but because he wished to marry Robyn legally in order to adopt her 3 children from a previous marriage. It was not an emotional plea. It was a cold, logical request. And in that quiet moment, Meri's world shattered. She had been his first. She had built this family with him from nothing. And now he was asking her to give up her place, not for love, but for legality. And Meri, true to her nature, agreed. She nodded. She held back tears. She convinced herself that this was another sacrifice for the good of the family. On the show, viewers saw her explaining her choice, her voice trembling as she insisted she wanted to help the children. But in her eyes, the truth was visible. She was relinquishing the one thing that was solely hers. With a stroke of a pen. Meri was no longer Mrs. Kody Brown. The legal permanence she had carried for 2 decades disappeared, leaving her a shadow in her own marriage. Once Robyn was legally wed, everything shifted. Kody adopted her children, yes, but he also adopted Robyn as the center of his life. He spent more time with her, grew ever more demonstratively affectionate. And the cameras could not hide the truth. Robyn was his partner, emotionally and legally, while Meri was left behind. In interviews, Kody's language changed. He no longer called Meri his partner, but instead referred to her as family, not wife, simply family. At one point, he bluntly said, "Meri and I don't really have a marriage, not in the romantic sense." For Meri, those words were a public unraveling of the life she had built. After the legal divorce, Meri's questions became darker, heavier. Why am I still here? What is my role in a family where my voice no longer counts? Why am I attending celebrations where the man I married does not even look at me as a wife? These were not simply personal doubts. They were the cracks of a belief system collapsing in real time. She had defended polygamy for decades, insisted that love was about covenant rather than possession, but she herself had become the casualty of that very covenant. Still, she remained, because somewhere deep beneath all the hurt, she held a flicker of hope that something, somehow, could be rebuilt. The program did not spare her. Viewers watched her cry in lonely confessionals, saw her voice break as she admitted she no longer felt loved. Kody, meanwhile, distanced himself further, speaking of their marriage as though it were a past tense arrangement rather than a living bond. He shifted blame, spoke of energy and betrayal, yet never once acknowledged the enormity of what he had asked of her. He had chosen Robyn. He had asked Meri to step aside, and now he was discarding her emotionally, piece by piece. This, then, is not merely the story of a divorce. It is the story of a woman's identity being stripped from her in full public view. Meri had given 25 years, sacrificed her legal standing, silenced her own hurt, and in return was left with rejection and emptiness. The cameras captured every tremor of her voice, every tear she tried to hide, every forced smile as the life she had built was quietly dismantled. To the world, it was reality television. To Meri, it was the death of her marriage without the death of her husband. And so today, as fans look back at Sister Wives, the most haunting image is not of Kody with his wives, nor the family gathered. Together, it is of Meri's eyes. Eyes that for decades silently asked, "Do I still matter?" And never once received the answer she deserved.
There's nothing holding me to Flagstaff, so there's no reason for me to want to build there.
But in the eyes of the heart, it ended the very day Kody Brown stopped seeing her. The day his gaze no longer softened when it landed upon her. The day his words became sharp or absent altogether. The day he stopped turning towards her in moments of joy or sorrow. The divorce on paper would come later, yes, signed and sealed in the coldness of law, But long before that ink dried, the truth had already been etched into the silence between them. Meri was no longer his partner. She was an obligation, a shadow, a ghost of a relationship that once thrived but had since been starved of air. When that legal divorce was finalized, it was not just a formality. It was a door slammed softly but permanently in Meri's face. She stood trembling on one side, heart splintering into unrecognizable pieces, while Kody walked through to a new life with Robin. Not even pausing to glance backwards at the woman who had once been his legal wife, his first wife, the one who had carried the weight of his ambitions and helped to build the foundation of the family. In those moments when no one listens at home, when your cries echo into voids and your laughter goes unnoticed, even the kind voice of a stranger, faceless, nameless, can feel like salvation, like a lifeline stretched across a storm. For Meri, that legal divorce had been nothing short of devastating, a wound she carried silently. After 24 years of being Kody's one and only legal wife, she surrendered her title without a fight, stepped aside so that he could marry Robin and adopt her children, telling herself and the cameras it was for the greater good. For the sake of family unity, for the dreams they all shared of eternal togetherness. But inside, she was unraveling like fabric worn too thin, each stitch of self-worth tugged loose by the knowledge that she had been deemed replaceable. Outwardly, she smiled for birthdays, clapped at family celebrations, sat loyally at his side during those scripted moments of family unity. But behind the facade lay a reality more cruel than words could describe. Meri was alone. She was the forgotten wife, her existence acknowledged but not cherished, her loyalty present but unnoticed, her heart beating in an empty room. No tender touches graced her hand. No whispered words of love found her ears. No texts lit up her phone to remind her she was wanted. In interviews, her voice softened into trembling whispers as she spoke of her attempts to repair what once was. Her hands shook slightly in her lap. Her eyes blinked too often whenever love or romance was mentioned. As if she were fighting back a flood she had no strength left to stop. She was a woman on the brink, silently screaming behind polite smiles, waiting for anyone to notice that she was still there. It began, as so many tragedies do, with something small, something that seemed harmless, something that promised relief. A few texts, light-hearted conversations with someone who seemed to see her, someone who asked how she was, who praised her humor, who called her beautiful, who told her she mattered. His name was Sam Cooper, or so he said. He painted himself as a wealthy, confident businessman, worldly yet tender. A man who understood her in ways her husband no longer did. For a woman who had lived for years in a house full of people, yet felt completely invisible, it did not take much for those words to bloom like water on parched soil. Attention, validation, kindness, these were luxuries she had been starved of. And when finally offered, she clung to them with both hands. But Sam Cooper was smoke and shadow. He did not exist. It was the mask of Jackie Overton, a notorious catfisher skilled in the cruel craft of deception. Jackie wove her trap with stolen photographs, fabricated recordings, false promises, carefully tailored messages designed to hook into Meri's vulnerabilities. And Meri, so starved of warmth, fell deeper. What began as a secret lifeline soon became a storm, and when their conversations spilled into the public eye screenshots, voicemails, intimate words splashed across headlines. The world devoured them. Meri Brown caught in online affair. Sister wife betrayed in catfishing scandal. Kody humiliated. The internet churned with gossip. The family recoiled in shock, and Meri found herself humiliated on a national stage. And yet, when she addressed the scandal, she did not shout, she did not deny, she did not lash out at those mocking her pain. Instead, she spoke with an honesty so raw, it silenced even some of her critics. I was in a dark place. I was lonely. I was reaching for something. Those words revealed the truth no headline captured. This was not about lust, not about betrayal. It was about desperation. It was about a woman abandoned in plain sight, who reached for the first hand extended to her, even if it was made of smoke, because long before Sam entered her inbox, Kody had already exited her life. Meri had become the overlooked wife, the one Kody no longer visited, the one who sat waiting for calls that never came, the one cameras often captured sitting quietly at the edge of gatherings, smiling faintly but not included. So when someone finally noticed her, even if it was a lie, she clung to that illusion because it felt like oxygen after drowning. But perhaps the cruelest cut was not the deception itself. It was Kody's reaction. He did not comfort her in the aftermath. He did not shield her from the jeering of the world, nor did he extend a hand to help her stand when her dignity was dragged through the mud. He did not ask what pain had driven her into such vulnerability. Instead, he used it as distance, as a wedge, as a weapon. He called the situation embarrassing, framed it as a matter of image, how it reflected upon him and the family, questioning her judgment as though he had not already stripped her of every comfort a husband owes a wife. There was deception and betrayal, he declared, and that broke my trust. But to viewers, those words rang hollow. Trust, from a man who had already withdrawn his affection, erased their romance, and publicly stated there was nothing left between them. To many, it seemed less about betrayal and more about justification, Kody seizing upon the scandal as an excuse to cut Meri loose without guilt, to wash his hands of her while still looking like the wronged party. One of the most searingly emotional moments in Sister Wives history came when Meri, fragile but unflinchingly honest, broke down on camera. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed how unwanted she felt, how lost, how discarded. Her voice cracked and wavered as she described nights spent crying into her pillow, days when she questioned whether she had any worth left, hours spent waiting for a text or a call from Kody that never arrived. That moment was not entertainment, it was tragedy. It was the raw unveiling of a woman who had given her life to a marriage, only to discover that loyalty and sacrifice were not enough to keep love alive. She had not been catfished by Jackie Overton alone. She had been catfished by the very idea of her marriage. Lured for years into believing that if she stayed loyal, if she endured, if she gave up enough, Kody would one day return to her. But he never did. And yet, strangely, the scandal did not destroy Meri's reputation. If anything, it transformed her image. She was no longer the cold, distant wife some viewers had painted her as. She became human, achingly human, her loneliness echoing the stories of countless women who had once been invisible in their own marriages. Fans rallied, not with mockery, but with compassion. The question shifted from, how could she fall for this, to how could she have been left so desperate in the first place? Meri was no longer seen as a fool, but as a symbol of what happens when a woman gives endlessly and receives nothing in return. Therapy was tried, conversations were held. They spoke of trust, of rebuilding, of moving forward. But the bridge was ash long before those words were uttered. Kody admitted openly, almost carelessly, "I'm not interested in a romantic relationship with Meri anymore. The spark is gone." To him, it was simple fact. To her, it was devastation. Still, she clung to hope, to memory, to the history that stretched back decades. But Kody had already moved on spiritually, emotionally, physically. He wasn't coming back. And so, in the long shadow of that scandal, Meri began the slow, painful process of turning inward. Who was she outside of Kody's dismissals? Who? Was she outside of the title of first wife? Outside of a family where she had become little more than background? The scandal could have ended her. It could have left her broken permanently. Instead, it became the fire in which she was reforged. She saw clearly at last that she had been surviving on toxic hope, feeding herself the lie that love might return if she simply endured long enough. And in that clarity, she began to reclaim herself. Today, Meri is no longer the woman waiting for scraps of affection. She is the woman who walks forward alone but unbowed, building her businesses, traveling, meeting people who know her not as Kody's wife but as Meri herself. She speaks boldly now, unapologetically, a voice once trembling, now steady, a woman. Once humiliated, now empowered. The catfishing scandal stripped her bare. Yes, but in that stripping away, it gave her something Kody never could, gave her back to herself. And perhaps, in the end, that is the truest love story of all. Not the love she lost, but the love she finally discovered within herself. The love that no betrayal could steal. The love that allowed her to rise from ashes and walk into the light of her own becoming.
It was a very, very hard conversation. Hard in meaning heartbreaking because
She tried again and again. She tried. Meri extended her hand into the emptiness of a marriage that was already a shadow of its former self. Hoping against hope that one day Kody might turn back, might glance at her not with duty in his eyes, but with desire, warmth, the spark that had once made her heart steady and sure. She initiated conversations that fell into silence, suggested therapy sessions that ended in hollow nods. Proposed rebuilding when the foundations had already cracked, beyond repair. She wrapped gifts with trembling hands, wrote notes in handwriting that carried every ounce of love left inside her. Sat with counselors both on and off the show, her heart open, her voice breaking, her eyes begging for recognition. "I just want him to see me," she confessed, the words trembling like fragile glass in her throat. "Gosh, I just want him to want to fix this like I do." But he didn't. Kody drifted further and further away. The distance no longer hidden but worn like armor, like an announcement. In interviews, he spoke of their marriage as though it belonged to another era, a dusty archive he had no intention of revisiting. The word wife fell from his lips like a discarded garment, replaced by friend, or worse, family titles that stripped their bond of intimacy and reduced it to formality. To him, Meri was obligation, a relic of history, a piece of the legacy he carried out of duty. To her, he remained the man she had once believed God had destined her for. The man she married with faith, with fire, with dreams of eternity. She clung to the memory of the beginning because it was all she had left at the end. But how long can one person hold the sword of a battle when they are the only one fighting? How long can hope stay alive when it is starved daily by indifference? In later seasons, she gathered her courage, confronted Kody with the weight of their estrangement, her eyes searching for even the faintest crack in his armor. But his reply was merciless, brutal in its finality. "I don't feel safe with you emotionally. I don't want to fix it." The words landed like stones hurled at glass, shattering years of loyalty in a single breath. He blamed her for the catfish scandal, for the tension, for the energy she carried, for anything that might absolve him of responsibility. He found excuses for his withdrawal as easily as one finds air. But viewers weren't fooled. They saw through the script. They saw a woman reaching across the chasm again and again, only to be met with the immovable wall of his indifference. They saw her apologize for needing love, while he painted himself as the victim of circumstances that were of his own making. The body language itself was an unspoken confession. Meri leaning in, Kody leaning back, her smile tentative and hopeful, his gaze fixed elsewhere. Her hand resting near his arms crossed like barricades. Even in family gatherings, where laughter should echo, Meri's seat was the loneliest in the room. She sat at the edges, her laughter faint, her presence overshadowed. The other wives, especially Robyn, absorbed Kody's attention like sponges. While Meri faded into transparency, the invisible wife on a show where visibility was currency. The cameras captured it all. The erosion of connection, the fading of love, the slow collapse of a once vibrant house into empty walls echoing with silence. And Meri, with unwavering faith, kept dusting those walls, waiting for someone to walk back through the door who never would. In private moments beyond the glare of cameras, in the stillness of hotel rooms. In the ink of her private journals, Meri began asking the questions she had feared for years. Why am I still here? Why am I clinging to a man who has not touched me in years? Why do I remain in a family that has already written me out? And her heart whispered back, at first softly, then louder. You stayed out of habit, not out of happiness. Slowly, painfully, she began to listen. Slowly, painfully, she began to breathe. She started to travel, but not to escape, rather to discover. With each trip, each new sunrise seen from a different place, she reclaimed fragments of herself long buried beneath neglect. She poured her soul into Lizzie's heritage in a historic bed and breakfast in Utah, restoring it with her own hands, brick by brick, memory by memory. Within those walls, she rediscovered a woman who was not broken, but strong, not invisible, but radiant, not desperate, but dignified. Away from Kody, her smile widened, her laughter rang louder, her steps grew firmer. On Instagram, where once cryptic quotes shrouded her emotions, bold declarations now took their place. You can love someone and still walk away. I deserve to be chosen, not tolerated. Her glow was undeniable. Fans saw it, celebrated it, cherished it. Her eyes held light again, and that light told its own story. Meri was no longer waiting for her marriage to heal. She was learning to let it die, and in its death, to let herself be born again. While the other wives wrestled with jealousy, rivalry, shifting alliances, and accusations, Meri's struggle was cut from a different cloth. She wasn't battling for rank in a hierarchy. She was fighting for survival, emotional, spiritual survival. Her loyalty had been her greatest offering, her shield, her identity. Even when the world turned its fury toward Kody, she stood in his defense for a time. But when her voice finally found its strength, the world echoed back. Support for Team Meri surged online. Women across continents poured out their own testimonies, stories of one-sided love, being unseen, of staying too long, of finally letting go. For every tear she shed, thousands whispered back, "We understand. We've been there. With you." And suddenly, she wasn't alone anymore. The final severing didn't come in flames. It wasn't a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation. It was quieter, stronger, undeniable. It came with stillness, the kind of stillness that signals not emptiness, but peace. In early 2023, the confirmation came like the closing of a book whose pages had long been thinning. Meri and Kody announced the inevitable. Their relationship was over, permanently. There was no grand announcement, no desperate theatrics, just clarity wrapped in dignity. Meri's words were firm, poised, free of venom. She would no longer be part of a one-sided love. She was no longer asking him to fight because she had laid her sword down too. The woman who had once stood waiting by the door had walked out of it instead, and she did so with grace. And what followed was not breakdown, but rebirth. Today, Meri is not the forgotten wife relegated to shadows. She is a woman who reclaimed her name, her voice, her strength. She travels, she runs her inn, she hosts retreats, she uplifts women who see in her journey their own reflection. She is no longer the woman weeping on the couch, begging to be noticed. She notices herself now, honors herself now, chooses herself now. And for the first time in years, she smiles a smile that reaches her eyes. She didn't rage, she didn't beg, she didn't collapse into noise, she let go. And that silence roared louder than all the shouting in the world. That silence became her anthem, her armor, her resurrection. She stepped out of the ashes, not as the discarded wife, but as the phoenix who had endured the fire and risen from it unshaken, unstoppable, unforgettable. Meri Brown's journey is etched in 24 years of legal marriage, a decade of estrangement, a catfish scandal, a theater of humiliation, a gallery of rejections. And yet she endured. And when the moment of choice arrived, she did not crumble. She rose. She showed the world that resilience is not noise, it is quiet endurance. That dignity is not weakness, is an unbreakable power. 2023 was not the year Meri broke down. It was the year Meri broke free. And in that freedom, she taught millions. A lesson too often forgotten, that the greatest love story is not about being chosen by another, but about choosing yourself. Because every ending is not a grave, it is a garden. Every goodbye is not death, it is Janam, a rebirth. From pain rises. Strength from silence comes voice. From loss emerges the courage to begin again. And as her chapter turns, as her new dawn rises, we remain here witnesses to the truth, the resilience, the renewal of her story. Friends, this has been her journey, and you've been watching it unfold with us on Starspill USA, where every ending becomes a beginning and every untold story finds its light.